Hi, this is Mark from MC Media. Welcome to the second episode of our Origins vlog series, where we're chatting to local entrepreneurs and business people to find out how they got started and what the catalyst was to get them into starting their own business. Today we're going to be talking to a friend of ours, Dan Bond, how he started in theatre down in London and took a lot of the skills that he learned there and implemented them into an actually really successful presentation business and events business as well. The challenges he has with technology and how he gets to grips with that, and how he's finding that technology can actually be really, really powerful for what he does now. So let's get through and let's have that chat with Dan. Dan, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. We just want to find out a little bit about the man behind Dan Bond, if there is such a thing. So we just want to find out how you got started.
How did it all start?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I am possibly the most uncorporate person you can imagine. And I think that's been an advantage, because a lot of the time corporates are looking for somebody to come in and stir it up and make something new happen. So I've really been involved in doing that sort of thing. I started out in the theatre. Don't hold that against me, but it was good grounding. And I went to Central School of Speech and Drama, Darling, and it was very darling at that time, which was early 70s, and things were still, just had a slight whiff of marijuana and was really sort of pretty cool and all that sort of stuff. And it was great. And I got involved in the course there, came out, I worked at the Salisbury Playhouse as an ASM, assistant stage manager, which is the lowest of the low, and I was employed by perhaps one of the last actor managers, a guy called Reggie Solberg, who was a large, powerful man who frequently, passing rehearsal, would hear a gap in the rehearsal. There was no noise on stage, and he'd reach in and switch the lights off on the stage because he was going to save money. And he would all shout when he switched the lights off, and he'd say, "Well, speak. I'm not employing you to be quiet as actors," and that's the way it went. And I made the tea in the green room, which is what you have to do. And the early stages, I was very concerned that I made the best possible tea I could. So I warmed the pot and I got it all very carefully together. And I did make great tea. And Reggie called me across the green room on my second day, I think it was there. And he said, "My dear boy, if you continue to make tea of this quality, which is very good, you're going to be making tea for the rest of your life." And I realised that I needed to try and change my tack. So I put one bag in, I didn't heat the pot the following day. It was a lousy cup of tea. Reggie got it, and across the room, he just gestured to me, and that I thought I knew I'd done something right. And indeed, I wasn't asked to make the tea for another week on the cycle. So learning what to be good at, and yes, you should focus on being the best you can be all the time. Of course you should, but sometimes it's not to the best benefit. Long story, pardon me.
It's fine. So tell us a little bit about where Dan Bond is now. And then what we'll do is we'll kind of reverse engineer you as a person, as an individual. So what is it you do currently?
Well, I'm a presentation and business development specialist, which sounds a little bit vague, a little bit spooky, but essentially I help companies refine and define their business proposition, which means that they can be able to exploit every business opportunity and every communication opportunity, whether that's pitching for business, talking to market their business, exhibitions, networking, all that sort of thing. And unfortunately, well-delivered crap is still crap. So you've got to get the content right first. And if you don't get the content right, you might as well go home, because all the veneer in the world is not going to cover somebody who's got nothing to say. So essentially, content and delivery is what I do.
Okay. So was it a long journey to get to kind of Dan Bond, the presentation guru, dare I use that
please.
Word? But was it a long journey, or was it something that you naturally fell into and at what point in your your life did this
Did
come
I
about?
arrive? No,
Yeah.
I never had the sextant out to set my course to presentation, coaching or writing. And I'm a pretty bad dyslexic, actually, which I'll come back to, but it's been an advantage because when I read something, I remember it. And when I write something, I really put a lot of effort into it. So I write to speak, which is really important. And a lot of people just write to read. And getting the difference, that's what I do. So I started out in the West End, being a company manager. That's after having gone to drama school and done all that sort of stuff. And whilst I was doing that, somebody caught me and said, "So Dan, do you really fancy doing theatre for the rest of your life?" And I said, "No, probably not, but I don't know what else to do." And they said, "Well, do a bit of business theatre." I said, "Well, what's the difference between business theatre and traditional theatre?" And they said, "About 50 grand a year, mate." So I thought, yep, that's what I'll do. And I started to write and work on the delivery of events and conferences and that sort of thing. And I was freelance at that point. I was freelance when I was working in the theatre because you're just on a contract, which is a freelance contract to be whatever you need to be for that theatre company for that season. So I was employed as a freelance producer to put events on, whether that was for IBM in Paris or Parma or Vienna or those sorts of things. 800 IBMers in one place, trying very hard to enjoy themselves and learn something. And that's a real marathon, but fun. So you're developing the content for that sort of event, and a lot of it is creative stuff. But unlike the theatre, you've got absolutely piles of money to do it with, as long as you deliver. And that's the slightly different thing from theatre. You might have £750,000 to do an event on one day, but you've only got one day. You haven't got another event after that to say, well, we'll get it right. That's the dress rehearsal. We'll get it right next time round. You can't. So that sort of electricity was bloody great, actually. It really got the adrenaline going. And I enjoyed doing it, but living out of a suitcase for most of my life was not that much fun. I travelled a lot. I did about 38 countries, I think. But the problem is that I became an expert on hotel rooms, cabs, and airports, and nothing else. So I got a bit sick of that. And there was a period with conferences and events when the events were just, frankly, a little bit just 6 shades short of bullshit, because I did an event in Vienna. This gives you an idea of it. An orchestra pit of 26. We had 100 and something projectors. We had 20 dancers. We had Miss World, most of the cast of Yes Minister, and 6 Lippert Slalom horses. Now, this is not about business. This is just showmanship. So I enjoyed it for all that, but it had all the depth of an oil slick. So we really needed to be able to concentrate on the content. And I started to write for people, and events were more content orientated. And I started to think, well, maybe I should just do that one bit, which is write and coach people to present, which probably started round about 94, I suppose, 93, 94. And I started to do that, and it was great. I really found a niche. And I think having a niche is really important. And if I was ever to say to somebody now, especially now, don't be a generalist, be a niche person. And I got that niche, which is to coach people and get the best out of them, not train them, because you train SEALs, you've got to coach them. And I started to read up more about developing the best out of people, rather than just saying, oh, take your hands out your pockets and look at me when you're speaking to me, you know? And that's really important. So I've started to develop the niche, and my niche has become the power that I've got, because I did a lot of presentation work, which really wasn't perhaps all advantageous on the outside. And I did quite a bit of charity work. I got involved with doing some events for Save the Children at Buckingham Palace. And that was because I was doing a job for Olympia New York, creating a video for Olympia New York. And the guy who had commissioned me to do that, I'd also been asked to do something, an event in Buckingham Palace. And the great thing was that I met all these incredibly powerful people within blue chip companies who were also attending. And I was meeting them on the same level. I'd produced the event. I'd had direct contact with Princess Anne. I'd direct contact with the people involved in actually presenting at the event. And this is all pretty important stuff. So I'd say to people, never look past an opportunity or overlook an opportunity that gives you the chance to be able to broaden your development, broaden your ideas, a bit of self-development. Does that make sense?
It certainly
That's
does. It's interesting you're talking about niching down and not being too generalist. But then if you're getting involved in sort of charity stuff, is that not kind of going back to being more of a generalist, or is it just about the opportunity?
I don't think I do the charity work just for opportunity, but, and I'd hate to think that I do, and I'm chair of some trustees at the moment, but the great thing about being a specialist is you become a bit of a surgeon. And the great thing is that surgeons are required to go in and fix one thing, and then they're allowed to walk away. And that's the great thing about being niche. You go in, you do specifically what you need to do, and you go, well, I don't understand that stuff, and I don't understand that stuff, but this bit that I've done works really well. And that's what I do. So I think the answer is niche is good because it gives you more control. It's very easy to try and become a generalist when you first start a business. And I started a business coming out of conferencing to produce a presentation coaching company. And that presentation coaching company was a niche element of what I'd been doing as a producer. And as a niche provider, you just have so much more power. But I've seen so many new companies start up and they become generalists. They don't say, we're really good at this. They say, hey, what do you want? And that's not the way to go, because people are really skeptical. Those people who say, what do you want? They're much more interested in people who say, I really understand that bit. And we're incredibly good at that, at making that happen for your business.
I want to kind of get a bit more of a feel for you as an individual working with, because you, as you just rightly covered, you do a lot of charity stuff.
Yeah.
What do you personally get at, and I know I said opportunity before, but personally, what do you actually get out of that kind of environment and being able to help? Is it about help? Is it about you getting self-developed again? Back to things you covered?
I think it's, as much as anything, it's an extension of the coaching. Because there's a wonderful thing when you write for somebody and you coach them and you stand at the back of the hall or the room or wherever they're presenting. And at that moment, you have no power. You just have to watch it work or watch it crash. And that's a scary moment, but it pretty well works all the time. And I think that there is always that element of risk, because you're talking about a human being, and human beings just have moments of good and bad. So the great thing about coaching is you've got to make it work. And conference producing was a bit like that, because you'd spend months putting together a project. On the day, you'd walk around with your hands in your pockets doing nothing but talking to the client, because everything at that point had been done. There was nothing else to do. And it either was going to work because you've done your job properly, or it wasn't because you hadn't done your job properly. The same applies to presentation coaching and writing. And the same applies to working as a trustee, because as a trustee, you are responsible for the way in which a charity operates. And yet you are not there on the front line delivering it. So you are facilitating and you are responsible for the way in which that organisation functions. And it is incredibly rewarding to change and develop and mature a charity and help them be the best they can be. And in the end, you are standing back and watching other people do their job really well. And that's a fantastic feeling. And it's just as good as standing at the back of a large conference venue watching an event happen, and you made that event happen, but you are not touching it at that moment. And it's the same buzz.
And I know we've had conversations in the past, so we've covered the charity stuff. We've covered how you eventually became,
Yep.
Dan Bond's presentation. But I know you work a lot with university and nurturing of these young minds that are going to be our future.
Yes.
What's the difference in working with them than it is with working with established businesses and kind of teaching them the skills? Is there a particular challenge that's more difficult to break down, a different barrier that you've got to kind of circumnavigate with the youngsters now? Just give us a feel for how that affects you and your delivery and the way that you approach it.
It's a really interesting question about working with students, because it's rather like theatre pantomime. And it's like theatre pantomime because when you've got 1,000 children in a theatre and they're watching a pantomime, they have no ground rules. They do not know that you don't wolf whistle when it goes to blackout at the start before the curtain goes out. They have no specific order not to say, hang on a minute, mister, there's somebody standing behind you. That's what they feel happy to do because they see it as an interaction. They have no formalised theatre process. And it's rather the same for students at university. They have no organised presentation process, or they haven't got any preconceptions. And they're prepared to try stuff which CEOs would find really difficult. And they can find authenticity, that really precious jewel of presentation, in a way, and connect with it in a way that is just fantastic, because they don't have these preconceptions. They don't have the rigid structure that says you must do it like this. They have other stuff, which is emotional angst that young people have about all sorts of stuff. But you can work with them on that. You can develop them. And I love it because it's a bit of theatre. It is rather like I go into a lecture theatre with 360 students in the first year, most of whom, if they're female, have got more tan on them than is absolutely socially acceptable. But strangely enough, they turn white by the third year. That's just an observation, though. But you've got all these people who are crammed in there, and it's just like taking the curtain up on a piece of pantomime. Well, I hope that my delivery is not pantomime. But it is, because they have no preconceptions. I can go and sit beside them and have a conversation with them whilst I'm actually in the presentation. I can get people to come up and do things with me, which you'd never get corporate audiences to do. So it's fantastic. And to watch them do it when they do in their final year presentations, it's a real buzz, because you're back at the end, back of the room, not doing anything, just watching it happen.
Is that something that you wish you kind of got involved in earlier on in sort of your career then, or even, when you started your business? Is it an area that if you'd kind of known was around or existed that you would have maybe focused more on in the early stages, or did you think timing wasn't quite right for you?
I think you get very caught up on money, position, doing the best for the best if you can, all those things. You get a bit more pragmatic when you're older, I think, and that's fair enough, I hope. You're so busy making a career. I did teach at Central for a while. I went back and taught there for a while. That was basically because I didn't know what else to do, which is really sad. So that was the wrong reason to go back. I enjoyed it, but I was too young. I was 26. That's ridiculous, isn't it? But I went back and I taught there for a while at 26. But I then went on to the West End and did some other stuff. But basically, I think the answer is that working with young people is a buzz that I've found now, as well as the charity stuff, which I either hadn't had time for, I was too focused on other things.
Let's talk a little bit now about kind of where you are currently and the kind of things that you do now and how that relates to where they were structured from, you know, where they came about, how you developed and drove in that direction.
I think what I do now is fundamentally practical, and I've always been really quite practical. And going back to the theatre roots, there is a practical thing round theatre, acting, which is remember your lines and don't bump into the furniture, all right? Basics of acting. And it's said with tongue-in-cheek, but it's true. There are some practical things that in the old-fashioned theatre in rep, you used to learn something called door acting. And door acting was the ability to close the door on a flat, which the flat was made of canvas and wood, without making the canvas flap on the flat that it was made of. So you could close it, but not make everything shake. This is called door acting, doing it with conviction, but not making the set shake. And there is that practical thing, which is round all sorts of presentations. So that came out of the theatre and into production of events and conferences and the practical stuff, because it's down to one of the things that I'd always do with speakers is something called traffic control, that I would get everybody sitting in the right place so they could all come up to the lectern in turn without bumping into each other. You'd think that was simple. Trust me, it happens all the time. And getting these basic practical things right is at the very heart of making people feel happy and making people feel relaxed. And a lot of my work is down to the way in which I practice with people, which is I call battle conditions practice, which is practical. You start from where you're going to start off from, sitting down, focused, before you get up to walk to the lectern or walk to the middle of the stage, and the moments that happen before you present. This is all about the practical process, and you've got to get people into that. And so I suppose my roots, it's practicality, and that practicality's come up with content as well, because the number of businesses I go into who are so unclear about the fundamentals of their business, and you will ask simple questions and there will be looks of complete confusion back. And I bring with myself to companies something I laughingly call portable ignorance. And portable ignorance is the ability to walk into a business and say, I know nothing about your business. Tell me about that. And when they tell me about it, I'll say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Can you tell me a bit more? Can you tell me a bit more? This is portable ignorance. Mining the ideas from people. And I think as a mindset across everything that you do, the moment you think you know what you're dealing with is the moment you're probably wrong, because you haven't asked enough questions, developed enough of an understanding to be able for the ideas. And this is what coaching is about. You don't tell people how to do things when you coach them. You develop the way in which they feel, which causes them to do things the way they need to do them for best results. And that's the same when you're developing and mining information from a client.
One of the things I'm really keen to kind of find out from you is technology now. Obviously, when you probably started, a lot of this digital stuff wasn't around.
A lot of this digital stuff wasn't.
How have you kind of adapted? Or do you still use those traditional kind of methods to get the point across? Or, how have you made that transition?
Okay, transition. I possibly haven't made that transition. And there was a wonderful time in conferences and events where every video was £25,000, all right? For reasons I've never yet to remember But it was all done on tape, and it was all done on Beta and Betacam, not Betamax, by the way, just in case we're confusing there. And it was all done on Betacam, and you could really, at the early days, you could buy a channel of ADO, as it was called, which is digital memory, to use to create a video. But you had to buy it, and it was about £120 a half hour or something stupid. And so the technology's grown from that. Everything was slide projectors when I first started out, and just doing video projection was a real kerfuffle when you're doing events and getting large screen images. Now it's just not a problem at all. The technology has changed, yes, it has. But I come back to the well-delivered crap is still crap thing, which is no matter how wonderful the technology is, if you haven't produced something that's worth watching, that's worth connecting with, then you're still on a hiding to nothing. And the technology, yes, it has changed, but the fundamentals of what you've got to deliver with that technology, whether it's video, and you know that really well, if it's video, if it's Twitter, if it's any sort of content, it's the content. They talk about content marketing. It's the content. It's got to be great content. And that is whether you've got great technology or not. It actually doesn't matter, because whether I'm talking to you on a one-to-one basis right now, and the content's got to be good and work well, or whether I'm twittering to you, or whether I'm putting something on LinkedIn, or whether I'm putting something in Instagram, or whatever it is, or WhatsApp, or any of these things, it's about having interesting stuff and engaging material. And that's why I come back to what I do, which is refine and define people's business propositions so that they can really exploit an opportunity. And if you know exactly what you want to do as a business and who you are as a business, you can project that. Right, and literally project it using video, or you can project it using Twitter. So, but really, I'm a Luddite. Hey,
it's a really interesting point, and I think it does bring us back to that it is so important to make sure that you're getting a good message across, because there is so much rubbish out there, and it's becoming, even more consuming. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is that they're dumbed down, so that because there's this prevalence of stuff out there, they're more accepting of rubbish, when really, to stand out, you want to make sure that you're actually nailing the message and you're getting it across really well. So it is important to understand that it's about the creation of the message. It's not how it's created, it's actually what it's saying. Yeah. And that's really important. So we'll never get away from that. So it's a really good, valid point. So I think there's a massive need for people to actually understand that. So if people want to find out more about Dan Bond and what he actually does for people, where would they find out more about you?
I think trying to find out about me is something which I've worked very hard on. And the thing I've worked really hard on is, if you type Dan Bond into Google, I am #1. And that is the most powerful thing I've got. So when I go networking, I say to people, well, I haven't got a card, but if you put Dan Bond into Google, I'm #1. And you'll have heard me say, when I've done my 60 seconds or got up to do a little presentation, my name's Bond. Dan Bond, and I work very hard on that. Yes, I've got Dan Bond Presents as a Twitter feed. I haven't used it a great deal. I've got about 900 followers or what have you. I've got 1,500 followers on LinkedIn. I don't try very hard to do that, because you can go to LinkedIn and find me there, and that'll tell you about the stuff that I've done. But it is about what you're about to do that matters, not necessarily the stuff that you've done. And I've worked with some interesting and celebrities and what have you like that. But when it comes down to it, everybody I work with is a celebrity. And if I don't make them a celebrity, then I'm not doing my job. So it's put Dan Bond into Google.
Excellent. Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, speaking to you, and thank you very much for being part of this journey.